What's up, fellow sickos? Let's talk about Brandon Ingram and the future of the Toronto Raptors, because Brandon Ingram just signed an extension, 3 years, $120 million, fully guaranteed, player option on the final year. It will account on average for about 23% of the salary cap. It'll top out at about 4.6%, excuse me. And it goes through his age 30 season is when he has the player option for. And if I didn't mention this, the max extension he could have signed right now with the Raptors was 3 years and 144. So it's less than that. Had he gotten a free agency, I don't assume a 5-year deal would have been on the table, Grant, but a 4-year deal, 4-year max would have run almost 209. If you wanted to go for 5 years, I think that would have been around like 280 or something. So this is not the maximum amount of money that Brandon Ingram could have got if he went into free agency, is my point. I have a couple, there are like two main points about one. What do you think about the Brandon Ingram contract? Let's start there.
I'll answer your question with a question. How sure were you when you saw, well, I'll just give you my experience. I saw 3/120 and I was like, I would bet my life that third year is a player option. And it was, because it just like, it had to be based on what the market seemed to have been for him. And the sensibility of like, let's get on the market. Let's go 2 years and get back into free agency for one more big deal. Like that was so really good by him, I think, kind of making the best of a situation, like getting to a team that was going to pay him. Mm-hmm. And insofar as he had control over where the Pelicans traded him and kind of like getting the best he could short term and preserving like some optionality for like another big deal if he gets his value up, I think. Now, what I think about the deal is going to hinge on like how he goes about improving his value in these next 2 years, which is to say, like, I think he needs to be kind of a different player or like a pretty extreme version of what we've seen in spurts from him to really like get the market to come back around to the idea of Ingram being worth, the max numbers you're talking about or anything close to it. You know what I mean? Like specifically talking about the shooting volume from three, the continued facilitation, like that kind of stuff. I think will determine like one, his fit with the Raptors, and two, sort of where he lands in terms of like the next free agent crop in a couple years.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that they kept him, because why else would you trade for him? And I expected an extension. I guess I don't know where I expected it to fall, because if you just look at what the cap space landscape was going to be this summer, even if we stretch it and say some of the teams that might create cap space, if it's the Spurs, if it's the Pistons, we know the Nets will have cap space. I didn't see where the offer was coming from, but I think the Raptors are a perfect example of it only takes one team. If you want him, you will figure out a way to either cut the salary cap space or then you work out a sign and trade. I think I'm fine with the money when you look at it through like the percentage of a salary cap. Like it's just under 25% of the salary cap for Brandon Ingram for the life of this deal is fine. I was actually probably more surprised than you. I guess seeing it was 3 years, but I was a little bit surprised that the Raptors gave out the player option, because part of the value of him getting paid now to me should have been, if this works out, you'd like to have the flexibility of keeping him for the full 3 years rather than leaving. Because if this works out, they're not screwed. They could still pay him, but then he gets to get out the peak of his market that you helped rebuild. So I guess the fact that it wasn't more team friendly was probably the thing that surprised me a little bit, just based off how barren I considered his market in free agency.
Yeah, it's interesting because presumably he got the player option because of the threat of just, I'm not going to sign anything, and they had to cave on that aspect of it. So he did have some amount of leverage, which you sort of get, because like for Toronto trading for him, not that they gave up a mint, like we're talking Bruce Brown and Olynyk and like 1 first, but like you can't trade for him and then not keep him, I think. Right. So he had some power there. Yeah, I mean, the player option is bad for Toronto's side, because inherently, if it turns out to have been a good deal, they will lose him. And if it's bad, they'll have to pay him too much when he opts in. Like the risk is with the team in player options. But like, I don't know. I guess the financial terms didn't really bump me too much. I think the fit and sort of what that means about the overall vision of this Raptors team is kind of the two like most interesting angles to talk about. So like, as you look at who's on this team with big deals, you've got Scotty Barnes, obviously, you've got Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett's got a decent sized deal for his role. Even Jakob Poeltl's making plenty of money for his role. And now you add Ingram. That suggests this team is kind of done. Like there's, this is the team for a while. How do you feel about that? And how do you feel about the ceiling with Ingram being like the number 2 guy now?
I think I'm okay with it because we know they're going to get a high draft pick this year, and that will give you some flexibility to either develop someone who's super high end, or you could look at it and say, would this team consider making a trade where they're combining that pick to one of their other salaries? Because I think you can make the case that the player who becomes most, let's just use the word redundant or superfluous here, would be RJ Barrett. And so if you attach that pick to RJ Barrett's money, like what does that actually get you? And you can also say, even with Brandon Ingram on the books, it'll be close, but like this team could still be under the salary cap. Not salary cap, excuse me, the luxury tax next year. So with Brandon Ingram on the books, they have like 11 million in space under the tax. And so that's not factoring in, okay, what happens with Chris Boucher, but like keeping this team together while adding a draft pick is not untenable. So I feel okay about where they're at financially. It's just when you look at the pieces, even Brandon Ingram is a number 2, but in the larger context of this team, if you don't think they're going to move, one, if you're not moving Jakob Poeltl, I'm not saying you should, but like now you really need Brandon Ingram as a 3-point shooter to hit for spacing purposes, for Scotty, just the whole 9.5 court offense. You're also kind of betting on seeing a level defensively from him probably that we really haven't, at least not for more than like a season or a half season. And so I think it's like kind of a series of interesting gambles. And my biggest question to you, there's so much to unpack there, take it wherever you want, but like, how do you feel about him as someone, if they're not going to put him on the ball primarily? Just like, is he something? Because what I think benefited RJ, and you didn't see a ton of it in New York, he's been able to, and Samson Folk and Trey on their podcast framed it this way, like play within the flow of the offense.
Yeah.
That's something that we haven't. And to be fair, I don't know that New Orleans has ever really tried, aside from having him be like a standstill guy, we haven't seen him given the opportunity or been forced to play within the flow of something off the ball. Do you view him as a player who can do that?
I think one of the reasons the Pelicans didn't want him back is because he didn't prove he could do that consistently. And like the types of shots he likes tend to be kind of ball stopping shots. Like he wants to get into his bag and shoot 2-point jumpers, which like fits his like he's a lanky wing that can shoot over a lot of guys. Like I understand why that is. He feels that's his bread and butter. We've both touched on it though. The 3-point volume, which was at a career high this year, over 6 per game, that's got to be the floor. And like you would have, teams have conversations with agents and players before they do deals like this about like what the terms of the next deal are going to be. I don't know how common it is to have the conversation touch on like, here's what we need you to do on the floor. Are you good with that before we execute this trade? Because Ingram does have to be a kind of extreme version of what he's been and a pretty different version of what he's been for this to go like maximally well. I guess like, so you can see the vision of it. I can see it. If you think Ingram can be more of a quick decision, get off some threes, get into your bag if you need to. It's the end of a shot clock. He might be the guy that's best equipped to do that on the team.
Yeah.
Do you have concerns? Two questions before we get out of here. Do you have concerns that the dynamic between him and Scotty Barnes is a little too similar to the one between him and Zion Williamson that we didn't love, which is to say the bigger star is best on the ball, doesn't stretch, and therefore is like a clunky fit, at least with the previous versions of Ingram. And then secondly, from the Raptors' perspective here overall, was getting Ingram an ambitious move or was it unambitious because of like what they seem to have locked themselves into ceiling wise?
So let me answer the first one initially. I'm not as worried because Scotty Barnes is just a more versatile player than Zion Williamson.
Right. The cutting, the duck-ins, all that stuff.
Yeah. So, and I think Scotty Barnes has been willing to try or exist in different type of usage states. Mm-hmm. I think the bigger key there will be Ingram is rated for basically his entire career in the 90th percentile or better of off-ball gravity and off-ball shot making. So to me, it comes down to if he buys into it, it's not a talent or can thing. It's a will he thing.
Right.
And I think the way that Darko has used RJ a lot of the time, I think that you can get Brandon Ingram to buy into that. Now, this leads into your second question. I don't want to say it was this seems like an opportunistic move. I think it was ambitious in the sense of you gave up a first round pick that's probably not going to be good to get someone who you then needed to turn around and pay that you're only guaranteed to have for 2 years. So you only have them under team control because throw this season out the window for 2 more seasons. So it was risky, but you're also not going to get as tough to fit in as Brandon Ingram can be. Just the type of value he provides for a first round pick, and like not just an expiring contract, but also Kelly Olynyk's money for next season is probably skews net negative at this point. So what I worry about it though, and I guess I would answer your question with another question is, do you think it's tenable with RJ in the mix of the Barnes, Ingrams? Because I think this makes, by the way, I think this makes Emmanuel Quickley even more important. The ball handling now, maybe not, but just as a spacer. And even beyond the RJ stuff though, was this the direction for the Raptors to take this, knowing that they could have, let's just say, a top 7 pick, could be top 5, could be the first overall pick? Do you think that this was the direction that the Raptors should be going down?
I think they had already gone far enough in this direction that like moving in a different one would have been prohibitively tough, because you know, they did get picks for Siakam, but the OG deal got them Quickley and Barrett, and they gave Quickley a bunch of money, and kind of, you know, they're not locked in. They're not like, you know, cripplingly unflexible, but it's like you kind of have a rough idea of who's going to be taking up the biggest chunks of the salary cap here for a while. So I think it makes sense. I do just continue to circle back to Will Ingram, to use your term, which I think is dead on, like just buy in to what needs to be his role on this team. And it isn't a question of can he be good at it. I think he absolutely can.
Yeah.
It's like, does he want to do that? And honestly, it would behoove him to do that, because if teams around the league see he's willing to shoot 10 threes a game, or, you know, some insane thing like that, it's like, guess what? You're way more valuable now because you fit everywhere.
You will get paid again in 2 years.
Yes, and you will be paid. That was the problem before. You don't fit everywhere because of how you prefer to play offense. The Barrett piece of it is kind of like, it does just feel, well, Barrett has like blossomed as a facilitator this year. He's been better than he's been with the Knicks. Like, but I'm not sure what his role looks like if Barnes is going to be on the ball and Quickley is going to be on the ball and Ingram is a 5-assist guy. Like, what is Barrett? Just, are you good with a slasher? And that is maybe that ties to Ingram being willing to shoot threes too. Because if Barrett's, you know, like collapsing the defense and having a guy out there that you have to account for matters more. I don't know. Barrett's a weird fit. I take your point on that.
I am interested to see how it all come together, specifically with, I'm not even, because I think just Quickley fits with Jakob, Brandon Ingram, RJ Barrett, and Scotty Barnes, because I think RJ Barrett's been willing to try a bunch of different stuff, like just coming over from Toronto, the ways from New York, and the way he's been using Toronto is proof of that concept. But unless you're gonna, like, maybe they find out, like, should they bring him off the bench, and that allows more of sort of a natural fit, or I think people might frame this as, oh, Quickley or RJ Barrett. It almost becomes, just looking at a spacing perspective, I wonder if it then becomes, is it RJ Barrett or Jakob Poeltl, and you need to kind of remake your vision of what needs to be at the 5 spot right now, again, because you have Ingram. And I don't know the answer to that. That's why I really want to see it all. I'm more open-minded to this working, but I was talking to Raptors fans on Blue Sky about this. A lot of them were sort of, which I think is fine. They had the Raptors colors goggles on. They were really excited about it. And I understand that, but I think a lot of people were framing it as the only alternative was, what does cap space or flexibility like that do in a Toronto market? That's accurate. If my one concern was that, oh, they should just go into free agency and get guys, I was more so thinking like, and this, I think the cardinal sin would then be, did they prioritize the wrong type of return for OG Anunoby? But they started down this path last December with the OG Anunoby trade, where they actively decided to prioritize talent over picks and prospects. And I'm still not, I think the world of Scotty Barnes. When we did who's going to be better for the next 5 years, I picked him over a bunch of dudes that I think it made me uncomfortable, made both of us uncomfortable. But it just made me, you have the timeline to where you could have been more gradual about it. And so that's what I'm going to kind of be watching here. They haven't boxed themselves into a corner. They can get out of this. I'm very curious to see if it all works out. And I don't necessarily know that I understand what the optimal version of this Raptors can be, even if it works out. Because if Brandon Ingram's a good fit, what do you view them as relative to the rest of the Eastern Conference?
Right. That's the thing. I think the only thing that we can say with some level of certainty, because who knows how the pieces will fit together, is like the Raptors' priorities are to have good players on the team right now. Like that's what this has been about. And whether that turns out to be the right decision or the wrong one, honestly, is going to hinge on how well Ingram fits into this core.
I think that's the best way to put it. You want to take us out of here?
Thanks, everybody. Let us know what you think about the Ingram deal, the terms, the fit, all that stuff. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed there. Wherever you're getting your podcast, rate, review, subscribe, join our Discord. YouTube's in the links in the YouTube and podcast description. Shouts Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.